Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Alone Podcast. Before we get started today, we have a review to read from Apple Podcasts. This comes from Music and Moss, and Music and Moss says, "I love learning the background on all the contestants, and Sam is a great interviewer." Music and Moss, thank you so much for taking the time to leave that review and the comment and those kind words for me and for the show. It really means a lot, and it helps me to keep going with this project. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and work to do this show and to so far have pretty much weekly shows to listen to. So it does mean a lot when people take the time to not only listen but also to interact with the show. Speaking of interaction with the show, we will be starting a new part of the show, or trying to start a new part of the show, where I'm gathering questions and other information from the listeners of the show, and then we will then take those questions and those comments and present those to whoever is being interviewed. And so if you wouldn't mind, or if you're interested in doing something like that, you can go to The Alone Podcast on Facebook. So that's facebook.com/The Alone Podcast or at The Alone Podcast. You can also email at thealonepod@gmail.com and go ahead and send me a question that you have for a show participant. Look back through the catalog and make sure you don't send one for someone who's already been on the show. But if there's someone that you're interested in hearing from, or maybe you just have a general question that you would like to ask of any of the show participants, go ahead and send that to me again on Facebook at The Alone Podcast or at thealonepod@gmail.com. We'll take some of those thoughtful questions, and at the end of each episode where we have questions for either that individual or just general questions, we will go ahead and ask those and do kind of a quick 3-question fire round of listener questions. So again, thank you for your comments. Thank you for your participation and listening to the show. And with that, we will get right into episode 11 of the Alone Podcast. So we're here with today's guest, Brooke Whipple. So we will all remember Brooke from her time on Alone. She was out on season 4 with her husband, Dave, and then she went back for redemption in season 5. So Brooke, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be with us today. Excited to talk with you, and I realized as I was putting together some notes and some stuff for me, as leading into our conversation, that you've done a lot, and I think you seem to be very humble about that on the show and on your own stuff on YouTube and other things. But you really have led a life of adventure. So I'm just going to take a second to share that background with people, and I'm going to parse from a few different bios that I've read of yours. So, man, you grew up, it sounds like, starting early with the hunting and fishing and outdoor stuff, and then you've moved around. You spent some time in Montana doing wildland fire, which is kind of a secret passion of mine, so I'm sure we're going to talk about that. But then you moved to Colorado, and you were a lifty and a ski bum. This one was on the show. You were an award-winning baker, which I'm sure came in handy yesterday for those out there. We're going to break the wall here. We're recording the day after Thanksgiving. So, man, you're a documentary filmmaker, an author. You are a successful YouTube creator. You are a teacher, instructor, public speaker, so much more. What have I missed on there, and what would you add to that list?
Well, I don't think there's much. I'm just a curious person. I just think you should live life with just your eyes wide open and your feet hit the ground, and you just go for it. So I've just really never let anything, slow me down. So I'm very blessed. I can't believe the life that I have, and I'm just so happy.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll ask that from a different direction. Is there anything that typically doesn't make that list when people are talking bio, or when you're talking bio, that you're particularly proud of?
I think one of the best experiences in my life was log rafting on the Yukon River. It was just such a special place, and boy, I could just go spend lots more time there. On a log raft on the Yukon River is like my happy place.
So I'm glad you went there. That's a perfect segue. So the log rafting on the Yukon, I believe that was the subject of, was this your first network TV venture?
Yeah. So it ended up, my good friend Neil hired me back in, gosh, it was 2000 to be a guide. He was running the only guy in the world who would build like a giant log raft from drift logs on the Yukon River. Basically, put up like a floating lodge on this log raft. I mean, this log raft is like 40 by 70. It's huge. And then just float sections of the river. So we would float like a week at a time, maybe go 60, 70 miles, basically kind of village to village. People would come and then we'd float and then they'd drop off and then new people would fly in and come float with us for a week. And it was just the most amazing experience. So it really just, I can't even put into words how special of a thing that is to do. And anyway, Nat Geo kind of found out about him and what he was doing and built this show around him, building a log raft. And my whole family and Neil and his son built a log raft for the show and floated for, I don't know, a month and a half or so on the river. And they filmed, the whole thing. And so, my son, I think, was 9 and my daughter was 11 or something like 7 and 9 maybe. And so they got to go with us. Dave was there and, it was just amazing floating down the river, being immersed in the wilderness like that. And then there was this camera crew trailing us. So yeah, it was really, the show itself is pretty quirky and, not super awesome, but the experience was still alive and well.
I mean,
alive and kicking.
Does it capture, for all the things that TV is, right? Does it capture at least at some point the essence or the beauty of what you're doing as you're floating that river?
I wish I could say it did. It was kind of more those early years of, it was filmed in 2014 and it was, they like to emphasize kind of drama that really wasn't that dramatic.
Yeah.
And like, oh, what's the weather and these waves, and stuff like that. And, snow's coming and, the kind of over dramatization of things. So it was a little disappointing in that regard. And, we had all these amazing moments that, of course, never make it to TV because you're not in charge. Unfortunately, you're not in charge of the edit. It's kind of like Alone, you put all your guts on the line. And they kind of take that and make the show out of what they think should be shown.
Yep.
So it is what it is. We had an amazing time, especially as a family, and great memories. And so, yeah, the Yukon River on a log raft is just pretty amazing.
When you talk about the dimensions of that vessel, I think it's big enough to deserve something more than just log raft. That's large. When I think of
it's huge.
Yeah, that sounds massive. And when I think of these Alaskan rivers, and I believe that the Yukon probably certainly fits the same bill. I live in the western United States in Utah, and all of our rivers are fairly straight. They're not too windy, and when I think of those Alaskan rivers, I think of sandbars and twists and turns and just lots of meandering. And that doesn't seem super conducive to probably the most unwieldy craft I can imagine. I'm sure that leads to exciting moments, or is it, how does that work with something so large?
You nailed it. It's a silky river, so you can't see through the water at all. And it's just full of sandbars that change with the seasons. So, you have to really be able to read the water because you cannot quickly maneuver. I don't know how many tons that thing weighs when we have it finished. And what we do is attach 2 skiffs to the back, and then the props of the skiff, that's kind of how we steer the raft. So it's in the back.
Oh, okay.
So you think about like this big pivoting, giant floating. It's kind of like barging, I guess. Your tug is pushing the barge from the back.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we would operate. So you just really had to be reading the river and seeing what's up ahead because, grounding a log raft is a pretty bad deal. And same at night. Of course, we're not floating at night. We we land the raft, and there's strategic moments for that too. And you've got to, and even the river fluctuates every day, day by day. So you could beach the raft. You always got to be making sure it's boomed out, so it's actually floating if the river drops. So it's just a constant, paying attention situation, so you can stay floating, because they're not easy to move.
Yeah, that doesn't. I mean, it does not. I'm sure there's all sorts of metaphors that could describe that, and I can't think of a good one right now, so we won't go there. But that just sounds like, what's going to happen is going to happen unless you are paying very close attention.
Yeah, it's just you're in the middle of absolute wilderness, and the river can be a mile down towards the mouth. When you get towards the other end, it's 3 miles wide, but where we were, it's about a mile wide. So it's a big river, and it can get really gnarly, really big waves in sections when you get an upstream wind. You can have 3-foot standing waves on the Yukon River, and you wouldn't think about that, but it can be pretty gnarly.
Yeah, so my family, we used to do whitewater canoeing. We skipped the raft and went straight to the canoe, and so I don't have a ton of reference, right? But I'm imagining a river of that size with 3-foot waves on it, and that's, I think that sounds like a hellstorm. That's about the only way to describe it. I mean, that seems pretty wild and pretty wicked. Maybe not necessarily from the time on the show, but when you think of all of your experience running the Yukon, it sounds like it's obviously an important part of your life. Do you have a specific moment that you like to think back on, or that a specific memory that just kind of encapsulates that whole journey and experience?
I'll tell you what, I kind of had my first alone wilderness experience. Neil, we had just gotten rid of customers, that sounds terrible. They were done with the float, and it was just him and I, and he needed to fly to Fairbanks. And, he's just like, you're just going to be on the raft alone for a week. So we were tied up in a slough of the river, so it's not the main channel. But, you got to keep the raft boomed out, and you're just alone. So, yeah, whatever. Flies off. He's got a boat to the nearest village, and then they fly out by bush plane. So I'm just alone, I've got a battery-operated radio, and I've got firepower, and that's about it. I got a boat. But you can hear things coming for just miles and miles away when you're in that deep a wilderness. You can hear planes, and you can hear boats coming from miles upriver, downriver. It's really interesting. And so we're tied up to shore. Obviously, I'm worried. So we have like a gangplank to get from the shore to the raft. And I'm obviously worried about bears. And, I'm just like a floating refrigerator full of food, in the wilderness. Well, not refrigerator. Yeah, we actually had a propane fridge. I take that back. We did have a propane refrigerator. Anyway, I'm like, what am I going to do? We're at the time of year where it's actually getting dark at night. It's late summer. So by the end of August, you are getting like some darkness at night. And I'm like, I got to be ready for bears. And so I took all of our empty cans that I could find, and I stacked them up on the gangplank. So if anything was going to come on the raft, it would wake me up. And meanwhile, I had a shotgun and a rifle under my cot in a wall tent. And so you're all zipped up in there. And one morning, I woke up and I could hear claws walking across the deck. And I'm like, holy crap, oh no. And the problem is, the only way to look out is to unzip the whole front door of your tent. There's no window in the front. So I kind of grab my shotgun and do this army style belly crawl to the front of my tent and just kind of pull it open so I can look. And there's a porcupine. Because I'm sitting there going, why didn't my cans work? And, why? How did it get past, the alarm system? But it was a porcupine. So that was just a fun learning moment of just being alone. Because I don't really think I had been alone before then. Completely alone in a wilderness situation like that. So I guess that was kind of my first initiation into that.
And it sounds like that wasn't a terrible experience because you've spent a good portion of your life replicating that.
Well, it just takes practice. Being alone in the woods, in the wilderness, I don't believe anyone that tells me that doesn't make them nervous or scared a little bit. Because I think it's a human uh, instinct to be, to have that feeling of just that fear of what you can't see and what you don't know what that sound is. I mean, I think that's just ingrained in us. It just takes a lot of practice to get by that. I mean, that week on the raft, I didn't get a lot of sleep because I was nervous. I was concerned about stuff walking on the raft and eating me. um,
And to be
and
fair, when you're out in the woods at night, porcupines do sound about as big as grizzly bears.
everything sounds as big at night in the woods. Yeah, I mean, your mind just goes crazy. So it's really a mind over matter thing. Yes, the reality is there are things that can, eat you if they want to. On the other hand, it's not likely. And you just have to control your mind to wrap yourself around the whole idea of it. And then you come out the other side. Like that week after I was on the raft alone, I felt so much more confident and I felt so much stronger about my own abilities. So, and that's what I think is a pretty common theme, even if you're not on the show and you spent a night alone in the woods. It's an accomplishment. It's really something. It makes this mental, physical shift in you that's just really powerful.
Yeah, thanks for giving all of us who can spend a couple nights alone. Thanks for giving us permission to feel good about ourselves.
Absolutely.
I
It's not easy.
I appreciate that.
It's not easy. I do remember another time I tried to stay alone in the woods and I bailed. I'm like, I don't feel comfortable. There's no shame in being real about it. Like, okay, and you know what? To be honest, your instinct. You need to listen to your instincts
Yeah, I
too.
was just gonna say you've got to
Your
listen to that.
intuition. Yeah, and your intuition. That's valuable information. You shouldn't be ignored.
Yeah, I mean it's. I guess it depends on your worldview, but regardless of how you see things, we are a species that's been around for a very long time. And you don't get to be around for a very long time without getting really good at staying alive. And I think a lot of what you've talked about for the last few minutes really touches back on inside of us, whether we have cultivated that connection or not. Inside of us, there is something that is very familiar with all of these circumstances and these experiences, and it's very good at trying to keep us alive.
That's right. Exactly.
This Yukon thing, and speaking of trying to keep alive, do you have a story that you can share of maybe when things didn't go so well on that log raft? Because I can imagine that's, you're asking for all sorts of excitement when you do something of that nature.
Well, it's more to do with the navigation of the raft, because if you get the raft hung up, it can be bad. So one night we tied up on the north shore. I'm sorry, the south shore. If you tie up on the north shore, you get the sun in the morning. And for whatever reason, that we tied up on the south shore, and I don't know why it made a difference, but we were always used to tying up on the north shore. The river runs east to west in the section we were at. So the north shore, in the morning, you'd get all that sunshine and you wouldn't be in the shadows. Anyway, we were on the south shore that night. And so when you land the raft, you have to have the skiffs pointing downriver would be the ideal. And that night, we had swung the raft around so that the skiffs were pointing like upriver. And what happened was you
had intentionally done that.
Yeah, and the ropes in the front that night, opposite of where, this would be the front of the raft, pointing upstream, started to come loose. And so it was pulling the raft out into the current, on the corner, but it was grinding the motors of the boats into the shore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's no way to jump in the skiffs and fix the raft. So what's happening is it's just being
Nor
the
can you
current
just
is just
jump on
like
and pull it, like use a pole to
right.
pull
So
away from shore.
yeah, dude, it was bad. So we were all just yelling and screaming at each other and trying to figure out what to do. And you're like, it's just getting worse because the current's strong and we have this giant raft. It's just like grinding the back end where the skiffs are into the shore and pulling out the front end into the current. So it was just like a really bad situation.
And
Oh,
those skiffs would, because I'm assuming that without those, that I mean, again,
right.
that raft is basically going to be not useless,
Free
but
floating.
yeah.
Yes, pretty much. Yes, because it's the whole rudder system of the motors on the skiffs that are, getting us where we need to go, steering us off sandbars and whatnot. So that was bad, and that was while we were filming the show. And the camera guys that night because they were like right on the raft with us, they had to go like skiff off to some production meeting. And so they weren't even there. They weren't even filming it because it probably would have made the show. 'Cause it was
Hey,
just one of those moments where
can
it's
you
like,
replicate that for us?
yeah, not this one. So, but the good news is that they had left, which means they had to come back. And so they had a skiff. And as soon as they were coming, we're screaming at them, get to the front, get to the front. And so luckily they kind of bailed us out with that other free skiff. Like we were able to take the front back towards shore and like level everything back out. Because not only were we not in control of the raft, but it was going to like break off the motors and the skiffs because of that pressure.
Yeah.
So the production crew with their skiff like saved the day. Otherwise, no one would have been around. I don't know what would have happened. We actually had it tied to a tipped over pine way up onshore, and it like ripped that thing out of the ground, the pressure of the raft. So it was a real moment that you can't you couldn't see coming. You didn't, and those are the things that'll get you in the wilderness general. Like you can plan, but it's the stuff that you don't plan for, and then it's like a perfect storm of things that like fail that really get you into a bad situation.
Yeah,
So
what's the I can't remember, you might, but there's something about, there's I think about 3 or 5 bad situations or end up leading to like an ultimate catastrophe, right?
yeah, it's all these little mistakes that add up. And then you've got a massive problem. And that's kind of what happened that night. It was just like this one failed, this failed. Like we didn't do that, we didn't do this, and this broke, and this went wrong. And it's like, oh crap.
Yeah, that
So that was an exciting moment.
Thank goodness for the camera crew on that one.
Yeah. That extra skiff got us out of the danger zone there because I really don't know what would have happened. It would have wrecked the motors. The raft would have just gone downstream at night, with no like ability to steer it. Like it would have been really bad.
Do you remember how far in you guys were at that point?
Well, I mean, you mean time-wise?
Nah, distance, like how,
whatever.
like
I mean,
how
the whole
long
thing
were
is
you going to
wilderness.
be? How long were you going to be walking? Is basically the question.
Oh, there's I don't know. I mean, 50 miles, something like that. Like there's nothing out there, and that's if you walk the shore. If you could, there's a lot of spots it's not possible. Anyway, good stuff.
Yeah, that sounds like excitement that you wouldn't be able to ever convey to someone that wasn't
No.
there for that excitement.
It was scary.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, so the Yukon and that experience obviously is a big part of your life. And what other things? I mean, we can transition to. I mean, you've done everything, right? You've done fire and the everything. So let's go to fire for a minute. And how long did you do fire for, and what drew you to that?
I'm just a really physical person. I really like hard work. I like to be challenged in that physical way. And, I was just kind of driftless there for a few years. I'd gone to community college for a couple of years and I just hated it. I just wanted out of Michigan and ended up out west. So I would just kind of bounce from one thing to the other out there. So I only did fire for one season. But I worked for an independent contractor, Grayback Forestry. And yeah, we did a lot of project work, which is just, in prescribed burns. And then like the Forest Service or those people, they would call us up when their resources were, tasked out. And so we'd be like an independent contractor for the Forest Service and people like that needed more fire help. So it was super fun. I mean, it's really hard work, and you're kind of just with this small crew, and you just travel all over. And I got to ride my first private jet when they flew us to a fire. Well, it was pretty cool, It's just, and to get on the crew, you had to pass all the stuff and be selected. So, your physicality meant something, your hard work meant something, and those are kind of like value propositions to me. So I just like that kind of stuff.
It's funny as you mentioned that. I'm sure that, and maybe it's still this way, but I'm sure anyone who's done fire is like, wait a minute, private jets? Like, we've got to ride in that stinky buggy with 20 other people for 12 hours to get to fires these days.
Yeah, I mean, it was just because we were needed so quickly. I mean, it only happened once, but it was like a moment I remember. Like, dude, we get to ride in a private jet. It was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
There was only like 10 of us, so it was neat.
Did they leave all the snacks and drinks in there for you guys too to ransack?
Yeah, I don't remember that at all. I think it was just like quickest way to get there, get in, and get on the ground. So I don't remember getting treated like royalty, other than we just had to fly fast.
That's funny. So with your experience on fire, you did it for one season, and it sounds like you did a lot of prescribed burns, but at least were called into one major fire at least.
Yeah.
Do you have any experiences or stories from your time doing fire that you would like to share?
I just think there's just something so valuable about being with a group of people who kind of have a common goal and desire. I mean, that's kind of how Alone was too. I mean, you're just all there geeked out to do the same thing. And that's how, when you get together with a group of people, and I'm sure like police officers and first responders and, firefighters, urban firefighters, I mean, you get that camaraderie of just a common goal, common direction, and this kind of specialized knowledge. And it's just really an enjoyable atmosphere. I just really liked it.
Yeah, and I think a common thread with all of those things you mentioned, as well as the intensity of the experience, right? That tends to forge, not to use a fire pun there, that was, whoops. But that tends to kind of forge that relationship and forge, needing to be reliant upon each other in a situation where that reliance actually counts, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And so what I learned is I don't do really good in hot weather in general. And usually on fires, you're in the hottest weather and the driest weather fighting a fire. So it's like, dude, this is so hard. And anytime now I smell like charred anything, it takes me right back to my season as on the fire crew, because it's just like this smell memory,
Yeah.
You're always just doing mop up and clean up and digging out, smoldering stumps, and there's just a smell to that. It's like a earth / like char smell. It's very distinct. So it's like, ooh, that as soon as I smell it, I'm right back on the fire crew.
And I'm assuming that brings back good things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just good hard work.
Cool. And what part of Montana? That was in Montana, I believe, right? And where in Montana was it?
We were based out of Missoula, but we traveled like all over. We did tons of work in Oregon. The fire we were on was in California, no surprise. But it was really, we did a lot of work in Oregon. We traveled a lot.
But only once via private jet.
Only once. Still the only time.
Well, you should fix that. I think you deserve a good private jet ride. Did you get the helicopter treatment on Alone at all, or were you boat and
yes,
and I guess there was the swamp buggy thing for season 5, right?
Yeah. Both of those were a yes. So lots of amazing moments, that's for sure.
we'll switch gears here again a little bit and move into some Alaska stuff. Something I've been super excited to talk about was the documentary that you filmed. So you filmed a show about something called Mount Marathon. And, Mount Marathon today in 2021 is probably quite a bit more known than it was, a decade ago or over a decade ago, I think, when you did that documentary. And so for a quick, and you understand it better than I do, but I'll just give a quick background on what Mount Marathon is. So Mount Marathon is a running race. I believe it's in Seward, right?
Yep.
Okay, so Seward, Alaska. And there's a few different versions of the story, but basically there's this mountain that goes from sea level to really tall. I think it's 3,000 feet, something like that.
Yep, 3,011.
and for those out there, that
counts.
11 feet counts. Yeah, just to say, for those out there, that 11 feet, that counts. So I think there's a few different versions of the story, but basically a long time ago, there was some miners that were hanging out in town, and I think one version involves alcohol and one might not, but basically someone looked up at the mountaintop and said, hey, I can do that in an hour. And so, inebriated or not, some people went and decided to try and make it to the top of this mountain in an hour. And so basically you're going from sea level to 3,011 feet, and you're doing that in what, a mile and a half, somewhere in there?
Oh, it's 3 miles total. It's like classified as like the hardest 5K in America.
But
maybe in the world. I don't know.
But the vertical gain, I mean, you're doing that
vertical.
in about a mile and a half, right?
I think so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so
it's brutal.
If you're interested in seeing something equally terrifying and entertaining, go find some footage from Mount Marathon, and especially of people descending Mount Marathon. And I mean, it looks like less than controlled chaos of legs and arms and bodies just, flinging themselves off of this nearly vertical mountain.
Yes.
So you've competed in Mount Marathon, and you did your documentary there. What I mean, you're going to say hard work, I'm sure, but what made you decide that doing something like Mount Marathon was a good idea?
Well, I think the first time I decided I wanted to run the race, I was just pregnant. I'm like, well, that sounds like a logical thing to shoot for. I don't know. It just really captured my attention. I had heard about the race, and I really just wanted to do it. I just really love a challenge. And so I went down, and it's so popular, you have to put in for a lottery to win the race, to get a spot. And I put in and I got it. I'm like, holy crap. Okay, so now I have to train and do this thing. So
were you a runner prior to this?
Yeah, I was a really good runner in school.
Okay.
But I mean, this is a while past high school. Let's just be honest.
And were you a mountain runner, I guess, is the real question.
No, not really. No, just cross country type running, and I've always been in pretty good shape. And so I just had my son as my second child. I'm like, yeah, let's go run this race. And so trained and went and did it, and I was just floored. The only spectators there are is on the sea level. The very start and bottom of the race is in town in Seward, Alaska. The rest of the race is completely goat climbing and getting up and down the mountain. I mean, it's just it's insane. I couldn't believe what I was participating in, and and I had been there and ran through it before I actually did the race. But I mean, it's really, really crazy. And I got done thinking, the world needs to see this race. This is insane, and you're not going to see it unless you're on the mountain, and very, very few spectators climb the mountain to see what's actually happening up there. So it's only spectator or the actual participants that are going through it that see what's going on. So I was just really inspired, and I was just kind of getting into filmmaking at that point, and I thought, what a great first project. I'll just whip out a documentary. So it's I am proud of the documentary still, but like I would change so much. I know so much more now, but for a first run, like I did pretty good with it. And so to get in the race, so here I'm planning this documentary, but yet like I'm going to have to film and like race at the same time. So I researched and found like the lightest camera at the time. I mean, a decade ago, that's asking a lot. And it was still like mini DV tape. It wasn't even digital at that point. And so I found like a 1.5 pound camera and I ran with that. And then I had like GoPros. I had a GoPro on my hat. And then I'd hired like 2 guys to like strategically be in a couple places in the race to actually also capture some footage. And then I just did tons of interviews and like put this documentary together. But I didn't win the lottery that time. So they have this auction the night before the race. So here I've planned this documentary and I don't have a slot to run it. So I had saved up money for like a year because these slots, they auction off 10 spots in the women's and 10 spots in the men's. And I was like, I have to buy my way into this race. But it made a good, little segment for the documentary too. So here I am like, I'm at the auction trying to get a spot. And, I think I paid $700 to run the race.
Whoa.
That was the cost of entry for me. And some years they go like $2,000. People go crazy to get into this race.
That's a lot of money for the privilege of beating yourself up.
But, I had everything on the line. Like I planned on filming this documentary. I had to get in the race. So yeah, I ran the whole stupid race with that camera in my hand and the GoPro on my head. And it was wonderful. But that race is so intense. And you're right, coming down is just like you're jumping off the moon. It's just this really loose scree. And coming down is my favorite. I just love the giant leaps you can take. It just, and you have to like tape up like your socks and your shoes because you'll just fill them with that stuff coming down. And yeah, it's an incredible race. I believe it's the 3rd oldest foot race in the country. And I believe this year might be the 100th anniversary coming up. I think 2022 might be the 100th anniversary of that race. So the town of Seward goes from like, 4,000 people to like 35,000 people for that 4th of July weekend because it takes place every 4th of July. So it's just amazing. It's intense.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it, because I've known about Mount Marathon for a few years.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I used to run and mountain run and do all that fun stuff. And I agree, the descent on any mountain run is the most fun part. But for me, when so Mount Marathon has actually gained what I would call some level of popularity in the last probably 5 or 6 years. But when I saw that you had done your documentary, 5 or 6 years before that, it just intrigued me because at that point in time, I mean, and you just kind of confirmed that, at that point in time, Mount Marathon was, would have been very, very, I don't want to say cult following, but it would have been very, very niche as far as who knew about it and who was doing it. And so it's awesome that you kind of were so it's fun for me, a decade later, being someone who has followed that race and who does watch the things that are put out about Mount Marathon and has been intrigued by it, to then learn that, that you were kind of the original person to show, not to just tell, but to show Mount Marathon to the world. That's really neat and kind of special for me. Is that footage of, like, do you have that available? Is it on your YouTube channel, or is there somewhere that people can go and watch that?
Unfortunately, I never did upload it to like YouTube. I should do that. Otherwise, believe it or not, people, you have to order it on DVD from me, which is so old school. That's the only place you can see it. And I do believe, I think a couple other films, documentary-ish things have been made since I did mine. But yeah, you have to like get on my Etsy store and order a copy. And I sell them cheap because I have too many of them. They're like $6.
Well, then I won't pressure you to digitize because I don't want to take away from your DVD selling
totally agree.
magnate business. But
No,
Um,
I would actually love to be rid of them completely.
coming from someone who I don't even think I have the ability to play a DVD in my home anymore,
Exactly.
I would love to see that on your YouTube channel sometime.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if you go back, and I'm talking back years, you have to go to like the bottom of my channel. I have a couple little snippets of like trailer type stuff on my channel, which is Girl in the Woods. So if you go back to like 2009 or something, 2010, I don't even know when I posted it, but there's a couple little snippets on my YouTube channel. But I do need to digitize the whole thing and put it out. That'd be really fun.
Well, when you do, I'm subscribed, so I'm going to be excited to get that notification at some point
Okay.
because I'm excited to see what that original take on the race is and was, because it's a fascinating thing. So we've talked a lot about your filmmaking, and we've mentioned YouTube. So I'm going to try and tee this up in a way that will help people understand. So I have a podcast. I don't know if anyone listening understands or knows that, but I run a podcast, and I feel pretty good about my show, right? It's very small. It's a niche group of people that are interested in the Alone Show, and I get about 300 listens per episode, and that's in the first couple of weeks, and we're only 2 months old. But I feel really good about that. And there's a lot of podcasts out there, and that's, my show, or this show, is in like the top 10% worldwide currently of podcasts, which
Awesome.
is great. But it's still a very small number. So to kind of tee this up, when we talk about Brooke's YouTube channel, again, I get about 300 listens per episode, which I'm super stoked on, and have about 120 like dedicated subscribers. Your YouTube channel, you have, I just checked again this morning, it kind of just grows on its own all the time, but you're at like 317,000 subscribers. I think you've had over 35 million total views, and you average like
Holy
100.
cow.
Yeah, and then you average like 100,000 views per episode. And so when we say that you have a successful YouTube channel, I think it's safe to say that you have a successful YouTube channel. And you kind of already answered a question. I didn't know what came first, the alone chicken or the YouTube channel egg, but it sounds like, filmmaking has been something you've been interested in for a very long time and has been an outlet for you for a while. Can you talk about the YouTube journey, and I guess why start a YouTube channel, and what does it do for you? Because it sounds like it probably fulfills something inside of you to create in that way.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's the creating part and the artistic part of filming. I just really, I bought my first camera in 2007. I had get like a yard sale like camcorder before that. Dave and I and our kids were in Alaska, and we're doing all this stuff that's hard, and in building up our lives in Homestead, and like all of our family was back in Michigan, and so it was kind of a way to share like what was going on in our lives and the kids growing up. But I just have this like insatiable need to like, I don't know, like record things and share things. It is a creative outlet. And the filming for me was what hit that sweet spot. So, I'm just filming owls and moose and our lives, and it just kind of morphed into like more creative things, more artistic type things. And then, the documentary, and pretty soon you're upgrading cameras, and it's just like I can hardly walk out the door without grabbing my camera. It's just kind of part of me. And so I didn't really put a lot out on YouTube until I think I'm approaching 6 years of like really steady, continuous posting on YouTube. But it's just this thing you can do, create something, put it out to the world, and share it, and hopefully inspire other people to get outside. And if you know my channel at all, I say get outside and get happy. And that's really what it is for me. And just filming that and immersing yourself in the outdoors, but with a camera in your hand. So when Alone happened, it was like a real super easy transition for me. I'd been filming myself and filming everything for years prior to that. And it was such a natural fit. And YouTube now is just, it's our jobs. You know, Dave is on YouTube, has almost 500,000 subscribers. It's my husband. And it's just a creative outlet, but also now it's our job. It's turned into our full-time jobs, but it's not like punching a clock. It's like, where do I want to camp today and like take people along? Like it's pretty amazing. I'm so blessed. And then the longer you're in it, the better you get, and you figure out what works and what doesn't, and what people want to see, and you begin to form this community around your viewership, and it's just really rewarding.
Yeah, again, I am on like the the very opposite end of that spectrum, but I can understand. I mean, for me, it's so awesome to just see that people are enjoying something that you put time and effort into, because I don't know that unless you've done something creative like you do, that people can understand how much effort goes into what you do. I mean, your videos, 15, 20, 30, 45 minutes. And, to me, that seems like it's probably weeks of work to get an episode, or to get I guess an episode out. So there's a lot of you that goes into not just what's seen on camera, but what's happening behind it to make that possible, and to put that out there for people.
Yeah, you absolutely have to love the process of all of it. Like, you have to like the editing, you have to like the filming, you have to like the finished product and the interaction afterwards, because it is a ton of work, especially like I built a cabin this summer. Literally took me months because I wasn't doing it, continuously. But filming an entire build, I mean, we're talking hours and hours and hours and hours of footage on top of the work of building the cabin. And then you've got to sort through all of that, which made me really feel sympathy for the alone editors, by the way, of all the footage to sift through to make a story come to life. And I mean, you have to enjoy all of those parts, or the process will be miserable and you won't succeed. So you have to like it all. And it's also a longevity thing. You got to stick with it. The longer you're in the game, the better you get, but the more people find out about you, and it's a snowball effect. So you absolutely have to put the time in. It's a long game. You cannot think, I'm going to jump on and just be awesome out the gate, because nobody is. It takes a lot of years and just grind. It's just a grind.
Yeah.
But if you enjoy it, it's good.
Well, and your channel, I mean, you do awesome stuff. I think, I mean, you undersell again, right? I built a cabin, but I mean, you've built a couple cabins on your channel, I believe, and shared that process. And I guess you've already mentioned the name. It's Girl in the Woods, but what kind of things can people expect if they were to go and look at your channel? What are they going to experience and see?
I think a lot of it is an immersive experience in the outdoors. I try to get the feeling across that you're with me, whatever I'm doing. But it might just be it might be fishing, might be putting up a wall tent, and that experience of like sitting around a fire. It might be building a cabin. It might be, it's basically anything outdoors, but with kind of this vibe of hoping to inspire you to get outside. And that's kind of what it has evolved to. But really, I'm just like filming the stuff I like to do. Let's just be honest. I'm so lucky to be able to do that. But, in order to be successful on YouTube, you do have to have you have to be able to convey something that's of value to someone else. And I think I hit the inspiration button on my channel more than anything. I hear from a lot of women in particular, I didn't really think I could do that or this, and you've inspired me to do that or this. And that just makes me so happy. So I think just seeing a woman getting out there and getting at it hits a button for some people. So I really like that.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of touch on that, because I assumed that your audience was quite female, right? And I think it's awesome to have someone in that space that is able to cater to the needs and to the experience of women in the outdoors. And so that's great that you're able to be there and to share that experience and to be inspirational to so many people. With your cabin builds, I think this kind of feeds into that, but were those solo builds, like mostly solo builds, or were you working with Dave or other people as you were putting those together?
Let's see, the one before the last one I just did, that was Dave and I building the shell together, and then I finished the inside alone. And then this last build was completely solo me. So that was my first solo build. And yeah, so I just really love the challenge. I think that resonates across like my personality. I guess I just really like to be challenged.
Yeah, I watched a few of your videos before this, obviously, so I could get a feel of your channel and your creativity and that outlet for you. But I didn't have the time to immerse myself in a series, and so I watched some of your more standalone videos. But I was very curious to know if it was a solo project, and so I'm excited to go back and watch those. And I would encourage anyone, because to me, I mean, it just sounds fascinating to see the experience, or I guess to experience the experience of you creating a cabin and a structure all on your own. And you know, I'm sure that you had a lot of those skills, but I'm sure there was also lots of learning opportunities and moments for you there that you share as well.
Yeah, it was a totally, I'm a good worker, but to be completely in charge of the build, and it was remote. It was only accessible by ATV, so I added another layer of getting material to the site. But not having anyone there to answer your questions or help you figure out something or stand up one end of the A-frame, like it's just, you got to just power through and do it. So yeah, it was huge learning. And yeah, it's kind of like that first time you stay alone in the woods, you're like, I'm not sure I can do this, but you actually can. You come out the other side like, oh great, I'm like so excited what I'm going to build next. I have like 2 builds already in my mind for what I'm going to do next. So
That's
it
cool.
just snowballs.
Yeah, you mentioned that your channel, you feel like you hit the inspiration button, and in talking to you about that, and in seeing what you've done, what I think is super cool, and I don't want to call it unique, because that's going to be unfair to other people, but I think what is unique and awesome about what you're doing is that you are inspirational, but it's very genuine inspiration. It's very genuine of, this is how I am and this is what I do, and this is why it's been so great for me. And so the inspiration, like you say inspiring things, but you're also just inspirational because of how you are and what you do, and it comes across as very real and authentic. And I'm sure that's just how you are, and if that's not, you are doing a great job of editing your videos.
Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. It's very kind.
um, so with the filmmaking, we've talked a little bit about Dave as well, and his channel, and obviously the one cabin build that he was involved in. Here we are 55 minutes in, and we're finally getting there, so I'm sorry, people, but you obviously had a very I'm going to call it an intense experience with Dave with Alone season 4. And then for you turned right around and you were back out on season 5. You had what, 9-10 months in between, but that's a quick turnaround. Can you talk a little bit about your time on Alone, and what it was like to have, I think to me especially, that experience with Dave where you're able to have that focused time, but also that intense experience together?
Yeah, season 4, we were both just really excited to be able to do it together, because I came across the show and was just like enthralled with it, and we both were like, I would love to do this, both of us. So when that family season came up, it was like, oh, this is a perfect fit, right? Like, we both get to do it. We both get to do it together. So it was really amazing. Can't say enough good things about production, and the cast, the people who were with us. We just love them all. We just had such a great time leading up to the show. And, you kind of launch into that show just buddies, and it doesn't feel like a competition whatsoever. You just hope everyone does well and stays safe. And it's constantly on your mind. You've just made these friends, and you're out there and you're wondering how they're doing. Wondering who's left. And in our case, we were on the coast, so every time you'd see a boat, you're craning your neck to be like, does that look like a production boat? Is someone tapping? Like, but we were alone. I was dropped on one side of the island and he was dropped on the other, so we had to hike to me, and it took 8 days. So I was kind of really obsessed with making sure camp was going to be set up for him, because I knew he would be just absolutely exhausted. And I think people really tuned in to see, like, oh, the only husband-wife team, like, they're going to fight. Like, how do they do that? But Dave and I we haven't lived conventional lives our entire marriage, and we're together 24/7, like, all the time. Neither of us really have worked for other people long term. It's been like gig work, or we're self-employed, so we're together all the time. And what you saw on TV was what you would see us at home too. Like, it's just our relationship and how we work and get along. So I think people were disappointed they didn't see a bickering like couple on the show who couldn't handle being like together that much, even though the show is called Alone. We're together that much all the time, so it was really not anything abnormal. We've lived really, rustic lives, and the first cabin we built, we lived in our dome tent while we built it in Alaska. We'd go to work, get out of work, work on our cabin. We'd go to bed in the dome tent. Like, it's kind of how we have always done things. So it wasn't that much of a step outside of our existence together to do the show. It was wonderful. I mean, really, we didn't have any challenges between us. The only thing I can say is, when you're with someone in a situation like that, the emotional ups and downs, you're going to feel the other person, which if you're alone, you're only dealing with your own. So if I was having an up day or a down day or vice versa, the other person, you feel that, and that's not helpful, or it is helpful depending on which end of it you're on.
Yeah.
So that was the unique part of that season.
I can imagine. I mean, that's a stress that, as soon as you say that, I mean, everyone who's listening is like, oh yeah, and that makes sense. But that's a factor that I wouldn't have thought about. But now that I think about that and think about my own life and my own circumstances, like, yeah, that would be an especially challenging thing to have to manage, or to feel like you have to manage, right? There's probably this feeling of pressure of, oh man, if I'm feeling X, Y, or Z today, that's going to impact Dave, and he's going to feel like he has to do A, B, and C, or that's an interesting perspective. And I think something that is really great and unique and really wonderful about season 4 is that you also had someone that you could share with, right? And not just on the show. I'm talking more about when you got home.
Yeah.
That there was someone who understands you, right? And that you don't even have to talk about it at that point. You can just look at each other, and I'm sure there's still moments where you just look at each other and go, wow, because it's such an intense experience. But again, that sounds like it's been your whole relationship.
That is so true. We are so blessed in that. I mean, you could get excited together before the show. You could like talk about boot camp. You could talk about launch. I mean, just everything. It's been so wonderful. And same as YouTube too. Like, we talk shop all the time, and we are so blessed. We've said so many times, like, think about these people who go back to their spouses or their partners or whatever. And there's just that connection is just so valuable and powerful.
Yeah.
It's very hard to, we were able to deconstruct and, de-everything after, because we'd both been through it. And it's that's a really interesting vibe to share, for sure.
Yeah.
The division of labor was really great though too on the show. It's just really great to have someone there to help with just work and cutting wood and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and not to, obviously not to get personal with anyone, but that coming home piece is like, it seems like it's the challenge of the whole experience, is the coming home, and for some, coming home to someone who doesn't understand, or to whatever the circumstances may have been, that leads to some challenges. And so it's awesome that you're able to come home and have each other to understand the experience that you had just gone through. What was it
Yeah.
like to, I mean, it's a quick turnaround. If you ask me, I think that, 10 months or whatever it ends up being, 9 months, turnaround to go out on season 5 and to do that alone. What was that like? And what was the feeling, like the mental state of knowing that you were going to go through that again, but then also knowing that you had to do it alone the second time?
That's a really, really great question, because it was such a quick turnaround. I said season 5 was like, we all kind of went into it with PTSD.
Yeah.
All of the returning people knew exactly what we were getting into. And that's different than the other seasons, where like it's just this really ramped up, exciting experience. And everyone's just so pumped. And season 5 was a really subdued, like it was like serious. We still had fun and everything leading up, but like there was this, I wouldn't say a cloud, but you know what's coming, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be enjoyable all the time. So it was really a different vibe. That was fascinating to me. The psychology of the show is super fascinating to me.
Yeah,
But
I don't know if I mean, I've mentioned this on a few episodes, but then I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say this until there's a psychologist listening to the show and they do something about it. I think that if there's not a university that's, or some psychologist who's working with production to get access to the footage, to just to do psychological research on the show, I mean, I think there's an understanding of the raw human condition that is sitting on those films and on that footage that is just, it would be a
sure,
shame for that not to go to scientific use.
kind of like deconstructing some of the moments.
Yeah, I mean, just watching in general. I mean, the
Hmm.
experience is so raw and so rough that I think there has to be some psychological value there, and learning that can happen. But you also mentioned too that you didn't, you don't want to use the word cloud, but kind of the just I guess humility is probably what to expect, or what to call it, right?
Yeah.
This humility of going into this experience. And something that Michelle and I were talking about the other day, we were watching back through as we get to watch and prepare for an episode. And when you said that, I realized, like, wow, when you watch the season 5, there is a totally different vibe on season 5 that I don't think you'd pick up on unless you had been told to look for it. So I recommend,
Interesting.
if you're listening, go back and watch the seasons again, or watch someone's clips after you've heard them on this show, and it's a whole different experience. But yeah, season 5, when I think about it, there was totally a different vibe that you could even feel of
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
you know.
I was really excited to do it alone. I mean, that didn't bother me at all. I felt really bad, actually. I really felt like Dave deserved to go back. I mean, I had to leave season 4 because I'd lost so much weight. They were going to pull me that day. So we decided to make that decision ourselves that day, instead of like have them come pull me. Um, and I know he could have gone longer, and we were in it to win it. We were in it to stay as long as we could. So I felt bad that it was me that ended it, and as a team, that's how it goes. So when I got called back from Mongolia, and it was probably just because they needed another female, you know, uh, I was like, sweet, but really I felt like it should have been his chance. Of course, I don't make that decision, but I was totally psyched to try it alone. And that, the alone thing doesn't bother me. But 9 months turnaround was, I'd be lying if I say that wasn't really difficult on me and my body and mental. The whole thing is really quick turnaround to do that twice in a year. And so I was losing weight at a clip much faster than I did on season 4. So at day 19, I was like the same weight I was at day 30 in season 4.
Oh, man.
So it was just kind of accelerating, and by day 28, I was like, I'm just done with this. I'm sick of being alone. I'm sick of this feeling of being starving. I'm sick of myself. So
Yeah,
I called it.
it's something that as I was watching back to the green tarp, um, that does almost seem like a cruel and unusual thing for them to do, to provide a green tarp instead of like a white tarp. Because your experience, you were sitting in there and just that tarp was driving you nuts to have that green glow in your shelter.
We made a conscious decision on season 5 that one of our extra things was going to be a white tarp, so we wouldn't have to deal with that awful color.
Yeah.
But with Mongolia, I decided not to do an extra tarp, and I was just going to roll with, the tarp they give us, that is for our camera gear. And if it's incorporated into our shelter, which protects our camera gear, then that's allowed. And so I was like, I'm just going to do that. And I paid for that. I the white tarp we had in season 4, that was why we took it, for that mental health. It's really important to have natural light. So I was definitely missing that. And it is what it is. It was just awful because you get stuck in there for just hours and you're just with your thoughts, and it can consume you.
That's another funny little insight that just shows how, to use the vernacular of today, how legit you and Dave are, right? You've done this enough that you knew going into season 4, like, yeah, we're gonna want a white tarp because we're gonna want that color in our shelter. That's just it's a small thing you just said, but it says volumes about your experience and the things that you all have done throughout your life, which is really cool. And something else that I'm thinking I want to kind of talk about is, you mentioned that there was that feeling. I don't know if you used the word guilt, and I certainly don't want to put that into you, but you had certain feelings and emotions of when you had to leave on season 4, because you were the one who was, losing weight and was at that point where it was time to go, and then being chosen to go back out on season 5. Is that something, those feelings of whatever they are, that you've been able to put in their proper place? And how long did that take? And how did you manage to do that? Because I'm sure there was a lot of stress and weight with, I don't want to say being the one, because that's like totally the wrong,
Right.
vibe, the wrong connotation, but that is what happened.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you ever, I still wish it would have been him to go. And, I honestly, I feel like even going in, I knew I wasn't going to win season 5 just because of my size, and it's been so quick. So, if I'm being completely honest, like season 4, we went in like, we're going to win. And I didn't have that going into season 5. It was like, I'm going to go do the best I can. And I remember Dave saying, like, that's wrong. Like, you don't go in doing the best you can. You go in to win. And I'm like, oh, yeah, right. But in my head and in my heart, I was like, I know I'm not going to win. And that's just being 100% transparent. Like, I know how hard that was. I know how hard it is. And I honestly didn't know if I had it in me to go like a huge amount of time the second time around. And so I feel guilty about that too. Like, yeah, he would have gone a second time and gone to win, So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just choices you make and stuff you have to deal with. But, if I wouldn't have gone, would Dave would have gone? Like, that wasn't an option. It wasn't like one of us gets to go.
Yeah.
They asked me, and I wasn't going to turn down the opportunity to go to Mongolia and have an awesome experience in the wilderness. And it was. I wasn't super happy with how they portrayed me in season 5. Like, they didn't even show me fishing. So I was pretty bummed. That goes back to that you don't have control of anything, and only your experience, and no one's going to even see it. Like, I don't have the footage. And it's really hard to give up that much, what would you call it? You're giving up everything to somebody else. So that's tough. So season 5 was kind of hard for me to deal with after. Honestly, I didn't even watch the whole season. I was so disappointed. I still to this day haven't watched the final season. like the final episodes because I was just like so bummed how like I performed, how I was portrayed. It's just like, oh man, no. And it should have been Dave. So I don't know. It was an awesome experience. Like that's what no one can own but me. Like I had an amazing experience in Mongolia. I was so happy. I was so immersed in the experience. No matter what I was portrayed like on TV, they can't take that away from me. And you know, Dave was very supportive and everything, but I just wish it would have been him. He
Well,
deserved it.
well, I mean, no, it's, to say that would discount that you earned it and deserved it as well. And I think that you most certainly did. You've lived an incredible life, and the experience that you both had on season 4. And I mean, so I wouldn't discount that, but you've said a few things I want to kind of circle back to and just kind of, touch on as we are moving forward here. But you talked about your feelings going into season 5 and knowing, maybe not knowing you weren't going to win, because I mean anything could happen, but knowing that you I guess you knew your threshold is maybe what
Yeah, I think I did.
to
Yeah.
put that at. And I've had the opportunity to speak to a few season 5 veterans, right? And I haven't spoken to Sam, and I haven't spoken to some of the others that, but so far the ones I've spoken to from season 5, they all have shared, I think, that similar, maybe it wasn't a, hey, I'm not going to win, but it was definitely of, hey, I know when it's going to be time, and I
Yeah.
know where my
Yeah.
threshold is, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that season 2 thing to myself again, or that season 4 thing again.
Yeah. I will say it was amazing being with all the other season 5 participants. I would be remiss if I didn't say that was just absolutely awesome. It's like you're just fans of each other. It's like, oh my gosh, you're from season 2, or whatever. You're kind of like fanning out on like your fellow contestants, and it's super fun. And you're just in this really, really tight knit group. Again, it's kind of like the fire crew. It's like you've been through these things, and it's just a really small club, and you all get it. Especially like season 5. I mean, we'd all been there before. So it was just super awesome to just hang with everybody and be there. And yeah, that was super special. It was, wow. Mongolia was an amazing experience.
What was what was it like? Because there's obviously this experience after tapping or after being pulled, however an experience ends, but there's this time that's spent kind of in camp and with the crew while you're recuperating and before you ship off. Did you have any of the other participants with you during that experience, and what was that like to be able to so quickly after that experience have someone who knows that was there with you if you had that opportunity?
Yeah, so when I tapped in Mongolia, Jesse had just got released from the hospital, so he was back at base camp because he had ingested all of that inner bark that really bound him up. So it was so cool. So Jesse and I got to hang out for, gosh, like a week. And yeah, you can just kind of deconstruct everything with somebody. It's really valuable. So it was just me and him in camp, and like, one person from like the fixers, people who make the camp and kind of like check in on you and keep the camp going, because this is so remote. Production crew was, a mile away or whatever. So, they might do an exit interview, but you're kind of just left to be alone again. But you got food, and you're kind of doing your refeeding thing, and it's just really chill, just really down. You're just happy to be warm and get some food, and like not have to work so hard. It's just really a lot of work on the show. So it's just kind of like you're on vacation when you get out, like, woohoo, I can relax now. And so yeah, it was super valuable to have Jesse there, and again, it's just a crew that you've just really come to love and respect, these people that are with you on the show, and production too. I mean, it's a great production crew, and yeah, it's just, I can't say enough good things about them.
Do you keep in touch with anyone from the show that's not Dave?
Yeah, we do. Before the pandemic, we got together with Ted and Jim Baird and their wives. They came and camped with us for a few days. Super awesome. And Dave has been in contact with Chris from it's Chris and Brody, season 4. They've gotten together. Brad and Josh Richardson don't live too far away from us. We've connected with them in person. Dave McIntyre, he lives in Michigan too. We've gotten in touch with him, and he's come over and hung out with us for a few hours around the fire. So yeah, I mean, and Mike Lowe, I've met and hung out with Mike Lowe in Arizona, and actually just bumped into him in Michigan recently too. That was really bizarre.
Oh, that's funny. Like you
serendipitous little meeting.
Like just bumped into each other.
Yeah, like I was in a Menards next to a highway, right? And I just get this random text like, hey, or I had seen him post on Facebook that he was in Michigan. And so I texted him real quick. I'm like, are you in Michigan? He's like, oh, I'm on like such and such a road. And I'm like, dude, you just passed the Menards I'm in. Like, that's crazy. He's like, well, I'll turn around. I'm like, sweet. So we met in the parking lot, him and his wife. I mean, what is a weird coincidence. Like, he happened to be driving next to Menards. I was like near the highway. So,
yeah, it was funny when you started saying, well, I mean, we were texting and he was here. I was like, oh, okay. I mean, so it was, kind of, oh, wait, he was actually driving by in the moment that you were.
Yeah, it was really, really serendipitous, really fun. So.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. Yep. So,
well,
trying to think if there's anybody else, but, it's like if you're close, if you can connect, it's really, really great to get together with people. I think we've always wanted to do just like a big Alone camp out with all the people who've been on Alone, but I think that idea started coming around right before the pandemic, and then it was just like impossible. But I think that's something on all of our radars. Like we'd like to just, do some big camp out where it's just the people from Alone, and you just can just meet and greet and talk and, share stories. Be super fun.
Well, I'll throw this out here. Obviously not like an invite, but something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm trying to figure out how to accomplish it, is I think it would be so interesting to hear, more than one participant just discussing, right? You just getting together. Basically what you're describing is something that I've wanted to try and figure out how to do, is to get a handful of people together and just, push record and say, and just talk and totally. hear that side of the show. I mean, certainly there's things to be protected and to stay personal because of how personal it is. So I recognize that, but I love that idea, and hopefully we all are able to do that, because for me, I've wanted to try and find a way to facilitate something similar, because I think the experiences and the things that you would hear would be, just phenomenal and very personal and very interesting. So hopefully that can get together. But you've kind of led us again to a perfect transition as we're starting to wind down here. So I had reached out to you before and asked if you were comfortable with me, mentioning you were coming on the show, so I could try and gather some questions. And then I put that out on Facebook. And for anyone else who's listening, it's kind of hard. Sometimes this goes just really fast when someone says, hey, I'm able to come on, and then our schedules will align, like the next day in some circumstances. So if there's someone, for those listening, if there's someone that you have questions for, or maybe just general questions that you would like to ask of any of the participants, feel free to either find the show on Facebook. It's at The Alone Podcast. Or you can email at thealonepod@gmail.com. I'll link those in the description below, but if you want to, you're interested, you can send some questions either for a specific person that hasn't been on the show yet, or you can send some general questions, and we'll take some of those, thoughtful questions and pitch those to some of the participants. So we received a few different questions. The first one that I wanted to ask you, I think this is actually this is a fantastic question. This comes from someone named Cheryl. And Cheryl asks, what did you learn from your time in the wilderness on Alone that is helpful to you during the pandemic? And maybe I'll expand that to maybe what you've learned in your vast experience. But if you have something specific from Alone, that would be fantastic.
Well, I think you have to be um, a problem solver. That's a big deal on a loan. Like, you have to figure things out without everything that's normal, right? So if you don't have something you need, you got to figure out how to make it or procure it or do without and do something else. And I think that's pretty apropos for the pandemic. I mean, I live in a very rural area, so I wasn't like locked down and I couldn't go places. Life was pretty normal for me too, because I don't have a regular job, and that may seem kind of callous, but life was kind of the same for us here. But for those of you that had to be just locked down and continue to be locked down, like, you have to find ways to entertain yourself and still keep your morale up. And I love being able to do a deep dive into something that I'm, wanting to learn or be curious about. And that's just, alone teaches you that you have to be, a self-starter. You have to be a problem solver. And that goes for if you're home alone and you can't get into your head too much, or you won't do anything, or you'll overthink it. It's kind of just like you just got to do it, boots on the ground, figure something out and make it happen. And, I think the pandemic gave people a lot of opportunities to do a little introspective, deep dive into themselves, maybe get a at-home fitness program started. I mean, you had the time for it, right? Like, no one was going to work and you're stuck. And I think it's a valuable moment to dive into a different part of your life that maybe you've shut down. So I don't know. I can see it as a blessing and a curse depending on your mindset. It's just like a loan, You either you can deal with it and make the best of it, or you can really kind of get involved in your head and let it go, south.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm not going to put words in your mouth at all, but as you're talking, what has come to my mind is sphere of control, and focusing on that sphere of control is so huge to me, anyways. And I think that's kind of at the heart of maybe some of the things you've just mentioned, is just being able to focus on what you can control and what you can do, and
Absolutely.
really taking charge of that, and then letting the stuff that you can't, because if you can't control it, it's just going to make you mad. If it makes you mad, then that's not super useful.
Yep, absolutely.
So that's fantastic. Thank you for that. And then we've got another one, and I'm glad that the show went the directions that it did. This one comes from, and I'm going to use the full name because this person they're out there enough that he's not going to care if I use his full name. And he's been on the show. So this comes from a Mr. Mike Lowe, someone that you're familiar with. And, and it's funny, this is a question that I've actually held off on asking this question because it's a very obvious question, and I've been afraid of, and you probably understand this too, I've been afraid of compromising what I'm doing, right, as far as getting to know the people behind the show and not necessarily focusing solely on a loan. So I'm glad that Mike asked this question, because then it gives me creative permission to get outside of the confines I've created for myself. So thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it. But Mike's question, and this is kind of a general one, but what didn't make the cut on the show that you wish did, or anything in that realm? If you can speak to that for a minute.
Oh, there's so much.
It sounds like fishing is one of them. Which when you say that, that I thought back to thinking of watching your episodes, like, man, yeah, they they weren't kind with the fishing work. But anyways, what was there that you feel that way about?
Season 4, I was battling an octopus. It was more my fault. I didn't get great footage of it because it happened so in the moment. Kind of had to react. It was really towards the end of our stay, and I was fishing on the rocks, and the fishing had been really, really bad. I mean, we were getting nothing. And I'm watching this giant Pacific octopus like pull himself out of the water on the rocks right in front of me. And I was like, kind of like, dude, like, what do I do? All I had was a hook, and I'm on the edge of like very slippery rocks on the edge of the ocean where I'd fallen, and like it's super deep. And then we're starving, and I want this octopus. And I'm like, okay, all I have is either my hook or a stick. Like, And in the moment, I decided to go for the stick, and I should have gone for a hook. So I took the stick and I tried. So I'm battling to get him more out of the water. And as soon as I started doing that, he's like fighting to go back in the water. And just to see an octopus like move and work and think, and it knew exactly what I was doing, and it was going the opposite. And I'm battling, trying to like pull it out of the water, and this went on for, I don't know, a minute maybe, where it was like, oh, I've got the upper edge. No, he's got the upper edge. And then he won and slipped back into the water. But it was just one of those, wow, did that really happen to me? It was so cool. Like, I don't even care if it didn't get filmed. Like, I was in that moment. It was so amazing to just kind of have that really intimate battle with an octopus. And a really, I'm starving and it's dangerous. And it was awesome.
Yeah, that's neat. Was the octopus like, were there color changes happening? I mean, what was like
It
the
was like big pink and purple. And I mean, just to be in contact and like it was huge. I mean, it was like the size of a basketball. Like, it was huge. And just seeing it move, I mean, I'm from the Midwest. Like, I don't get to see this stuff. It was super cool. And then on season 5, I made a lot of really cool floating. So we're on a river in Mongolia. That's where our food source mainly was, is the river. Catching a lot of fish that look a lot like Arctic grayling, but had this eddy. And so I figured out this like floating line that would fish for me 24/7. So I would just throw it in on a floating line with a grasshopper, and it would just swirl around in the eddy. And every day it's like, ooh, what have I caught? It was super cool. I was really proud of like how I learned to fish the river there and was successful, but they didn't show any of it. So it made me look like all I did on season 5 is like make jewelry.
Well, and they
Which I did a lot
even,
of, but
I mean, not to stir any pots, but I think there was even a moment where they had like, because there was a specific of not showing you fishing, and then there was a moment where they, I think they had cut you talking about fishing in some way, and it kind of just portrayed it as, I mean, it gave the feeling that like fishing wasn't happening.
yeah.
And so that's interesting to hear that it was. And for those, just to kind of paint that picture, if you don't know what an eddy is, basically you've got a rock or some other subsurface or even at the surface structure in the water that would create, kind of a swirling slack water behind it. So you've got the flowing river, and then as the water hits that structure and, pillows around it, you have this section of water behind it that is kind of a slack water, and you can sit there, right? So if you're river rafting on a raft or whatever else, you can hit an eddy, and you can be in the middle of a huge rapid set, and you can find an eddy and you can sit there and get reprieve. And so just to kind of paint that picture of that fishing technique of finding a way to land your fishing gear in that eddy so it can just sit there and hang out. That's cool.
Yeah, it was, Mongolia was really neat. That's for sure. Really interesting country.
Well, Brooke, this has been an absolute pleasure and super fun for me to get to talk with you and get to know you a little bit better. We've already mentioned your YouTube channel, so we'll link that. So it's Girl in the Woods. Where else would you like people to be able to find you? I know we had discussed before we started recording that you just revamped your website. So where can people find you?
You can get in touch at brookewhipple.com. Pretty simple. YouTube's the easy one. I'm on Facebook too, public Facebook page at Brooke Whipple. I think if you just type in Brooke Whipple, you'll find me. Let's see where else. Etsy, a little Etsy store. Girl in the Woods goods. Instagram at Girl in the Woods with a Z on the end. I post a lot of stuff on Instagram. So I would say Facebook or YouTube, and I love Instagram. So I'm always posting stuff on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, we'll get all those linked in the show notes so people can go and find you and keep up to speed on what you're doing. I guess as we wrap up, is there anything that we've discussed that you want to kind of touch back on again, or any records you want to set straight, or any last words you want to share before we close up today?
I just gotta say, you're fantastic at podcasting, so I think you're going to be huge. You're doing a great job. You're so natural. You did a really good job. So kudos to you. I think it's a great idea to have this as a podcast.
I appreciate that.
I want to deep dive into all the other alone people's thoughts too. It's super cool.
Well, you can submit questions if you want. You can go to the Alone Podcast on Facebook or thealonepod@gmail.com. You can submit questions. But yeah, I don't know. I appreciate your kind words. It's to me, that's been the most humbling part of this, and really the most rewarding and the most I guess validating. Not that, everyone says you just self-validate, but when you're creative and you're creating something, validation ends up kind of being a big role, at least so far for me in the early stages.
Yeah.
And it's been so awesome for me to hear how meaningful this has been to a lot of the participants. I mean, there's a lot of show participants that are listening and talking about how, like I've learned even more about this person that I have this shared experience with, and so that means a lot to me, and it's very special. So thank you for mentioning that.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
But this has been fantastic, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'm excited to see what the future holds.
Great. Sounds good. Thanks so much, Sam.
All right. Take care, Brooke, and you have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.